Over the years, Square Enix has developed and published some of the greatest RPGs in history going back several decades. But the problem is that some of their best RPGs are not widely known about and played. So in this video, I'm going to recount the top 5 underrated Square Enix titles of all time. These are the diamonds in the rough that don't get the attention they deserve and need to be remade in some form. I'm going to include both games that Square Enix developed and published in consideration of this list. But before I get into that, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in a comment down below what you think is the most underrated Square Enix RPG of all time. Here at number 5 as one of the most underrated Square Enix RPGs ever is Triangle Strategy, an RPG that came out on the Switch and Steam, but I still don't think it gets the recognition it deserves despite selling 1 million copies. This is an amazing game with amazing characters, amazing story, a fantastic soundtrack, and the Scales of Conviction system really tried to do something that many tactical RPGs didn't try to do. This is a legendary game that deserves more praise, so let's check it out. So when the same team behind Octopath Traveler began to develop a new tactical RPG with a similar graphical style, I was more than intrigued. When we all saw the first trailer for Triangle Strategy, it appeared like a modern Final Fantasy Tactics, and the demo for the Nintendo Switch gave us an even greater impression of what it would be like. It left many of us wondering whether the story, battle gameplay, and Scales of Conviction system were really as promising as they first appeared. Since the title's been out for some time now, and I've had a better chance to play it, I wanted to use this opportunity to explain whether I think it lived up to the hype. But first, there's the elephant in the room, the game's name. When I first previewed this title before it was released, I went on the record saying I didn't like the name. In fact, many of us didn't even think Triangle Strategy would end up being the final name since it was first dubbed Project Triangle Strategy. But alas, just like in Project Octopath Traveler's case, the name stuck. So did I change my mind on this over time? Nah, I still think it's a dumb name, and it represents a missed marketing opportunity. Those who intended to play it despite this aren't affected by it, but I have to think the name discouraged potential newcomers to the genre from ever trying it. The name aside though, there's a lot to love about Triangle Strategy. Let's start with the story. It takes place on the continent of Norzelia, which is controlled by 3 great countries: the Kingdom of Glenbrook, the Grand Duchy of Esfrost, and the Holy State of Hyzant. The 3 powers were involved in a grueling war until 30 years before the events of the game, but maintaining the peace has often relied on politics and economic agreements. The chief protagonist, Sarah Noah Wolfert of Glenbrook, is set to be married to Frederica Esfrost. In addition, Glenbrook and Esfrost plan to share the proceeds of a newly discovered mine. Both agreements are intended to strengthen ties between the 2 countries and keep the peace. However, when Sarah Noah is sent to inspect the mines with Dragan Esfrost, an unexpected violent incident jeopardizes all of these plans, and as it turns out, all aspirations for harmony on the continent. So right off the bat, you'll witness how real the story gets. Both it and the characters are dark and gritty, and you'll get Tactics Ogre and Final Fantasy Tactics vibes from the get-go. The most important characters alongside Sarah Noah are his best friend Prince Roland, the strategist Benedict, and Sarah Noah's fiancée Frederica. However, you end up meeting and recruiting many other characters throughout your journey. But honestly, the sheer number of characters introduced right at the start was a bit overwhelming. But I think the game does correct this a bit, and it's easier to piece things together as the game progresses. If you're into grid-based tactical RPGs, you'll already know what to expect from the battles. Each character can move once and take 1 action on their side's turn, and the player and enemy turns alternate. Battles have set victory and defeat conditions that are displayed on the screen immediately prior to the battle, and in the preparation phase, you can alter your unit placement before entering combat. Also, each individual character fills their own niche. There are pretty rigid archetypes here. For instance, Sarah Noah is a swordsman with balanced offensive and defensive abilities. Roland is a damage-dealing spear knight that can travel long distances on each turn, Benedict is a tactician that specializes in buffing your characters, and Frederica is a pyromancer who can use fire-based offensive spells. All the other characters you can recruit have their own classes as well, and no character can change their archetype. However, after fulfilling some basic prerequisites, including level thresholds, you can upgrade a character's class so that they gain new abilities and become more powerful. For instance, Serenoa starts as a swordsman, but he can become a sword fighter when he reaches level 10 and obtains a Medal of Bravery. After that, he can become a sword master when he reaches level 20 and obtains a Medal of Valor. So yeah, there's a single progression line when it comes to classes for each character. There are lots of classes represented in Triangle Strategy among all the different characters, so there's definitely a lot of variety with lots of great unique abilities that are fun to experiment with. Switching characters in and out of my party to find the ones I like best was probably my favorite aspect of the gameplay. Character abilities expend TP, which function like magic points. You gain some new abilities simply by leveling up, but some abilities require being promoted to the next class in your character's line. There are also special Quietus skills that are much more powerful than regular TP skills, but can only be used a limited number of times because they require scarce and precious Quietus points. You start the adventure with the ability to use one per battle, but you can eventually get more as you progress. Outside of the promotion system and abilities, your characters can also scale higher in power by upgrading their weapons at the smithy, which you can unlock in Chapter 2. Expending coin and items to do this not only increases the damage potential of the weapons, but can also add special weapon abilities that can be used in battle. This was yet another layer of customization that I loved, and everything worked together to allow me to choose not only which characters to prioritize upgrades for, but also which method I should use to do it. The HD 2D graphical style that Octopath Traveler made famous works absolutely perfect here as well. It successfully combines the best aspects of the visuals we remember from RPGs long ago with an updated look. The 2D sprites look great in tandem with the 3D maps, just as in Final Fantasy Tactics. Panning the camera works perfectly, and it's easy to get a good view of the battles even with varying elevations and structures. The environmental quality is about the best I've ever seen for a game like this too, and you'll notice it right away. The colors are bright, the structures and objects blend in perfectly with the battlefields, and even small things like the shimmering water look amazing. Honestly, I expected the navigation to function exactly like Octopath Traveler's, but it really doesn't. The graphical presentation itself is similar, but in Triangle Strategy, when you have control over movement, you're mostly moving through a rotatable area rather than a straight-up 2D view like Octopath Traveler featured. If Triangle Strategy had one unique facet that sets it apart from all other tactical RPGs, it would be the Scales of Conviction system. At various points throughout the story, your primary characters cast their ballots to make key storyline decisions, and Serenoa technically doesn't get a vote. He can only break ties. However, you can influence the way the votes go through dialogue decisions, which can alter the circumstances significantly. It definitely is possible for the player not to get their preferred outcome, and each choice you make alters your conviction levels. In addition, the recruitment of certain characters is only possible with specific conviction value requirements. This means you won't be able to recruit all the characters in a single playthrough. Who you end up with is completely tailored to your choices. The system allows you to call the shots on the story, which can split into several distinct branches based upon your choices. It is truly a creative and well-designed method to make each playthrough a unique experience, and it really was a fun treat for the player. Personally, I had a good time mulling over several decisions I wanted to make. Based on your decisions, you'll ultimately receive one of 4 different endings. The first 3 are more or less standard endings depending on which conviction values Serenoa has the most of. In other words, they're separate unique endings for utility, morality, and liberty. For the 4th ending, well, let's just say there's basically no way you'll get it unless you read up about how to do it. It requires a few prerequisites and is fairly difficult, but it is considered the best ending. I really have to praise the soundtrack too. It's really on another level. The main theme rings through my head the same way many of the great RPG classics do, and there's so many more great tracks here too. Unshaken Conviction, Unwavering Spear, Pride of the Three Houses and Until That Day are among the best. It has more than 70 orchestral quality songs, my favorite of which I've spread throughout this video. The composer was Akira Senju, who wasn't involved in Octopath Traveler at all, but the style is somewhat similar. I think it's about as good as you're gonna get on the Switch, and it's the best modern RPG soundtrack I've heard in a long time. When it comes to odds and ends, I loved how the tile overlay colors made it extremely easy to understand where I could move to and which units I could attack. I also wanted to praise the pincer attack functionality, where you gain an extra attack if you manage to flank an enemy along with an ally. It was just a fun idea that always gave me something else to consider when I plan my attacks. Many reviewers have criticized the game's dialogue length. Indeed, in between battles, you're often subjected to lengthy storyline segments, some of which last longer than 5 minutes at a time. I did notice though that some of the longest segments seemed to be packed into the first few chapters, and that they actually became progressively shorter as the game moved along. I don't mind the storyline segments though, because I'm kind of the player that really gets invested into RPG stories like this anyway. In fact, I think the character development quality was off the charts. The story was a real joy to follow. I thought about this long and hard, and I honestly think Triangle Strategy is one of the greatest tactical RPGs ever released. Its few flaws don't detract from the awesome battles, the dark and interesting story, and the fantastic soundtrack. The Scales of Conviction system opens up so many possibilities in the gameplay, and there's just so much to discover. There's even several different difficulty levels to tweak it to your desire. Number 4 on the list is Front Mission Gun Hazard, a mech-based action platformer RPG for the Super Famicom. This is a fantastic game that never got an official English translation or remake or remaster of any kind, though it has developed a huge cult following of fans. It also has a soundtrack produced by none other than a combination of the legendary Nobuo Uematsu and Yasunori Mitsuda, so it's worth playing for that alone. Let's check it out. As most of my viewers know, my focus and forte is retro console RPGs. I absolutely love them, but I still don't limit my retro gaming to them alone. I also like other game types, including run and gun shooters like Metal Slug, Contra, and others. The two genres don't seem to provide much of a crossover, but wouldn't it have been great if they could have been combined somehow? Well, Omayasoft and Squaresoft did just that on the Super Famicom, and the result of this dream was Front Mission Gun Hazard. It was an unprecedented fusion of a run-and-gun shooter and an RPG, and likely one of the most unique hybrid games on the system. The title was released in early 1996, so it was a bit overlooked given the Super Famicom was beyond its prime as a new generation of consoles took over. First of all, Front Mission Gun Hazard shouldn't be confused with the first Front Mission game, which came out on the Super Famicom in 1995. That game marked Squaresoft's first true foray into the world of tactical RPGs, but it's very much unlike Front Mission Gun Hazard. The cool thing is though, is that the futuristic world of that game and its themes were directly brought into this one. Even though it's a Gaiden of sorts that doesn't follow the exact timeline, many of the same concepts are used. In this way, it's best described as a spin-off within the same world. It's a side-scrolling game where you don cybernetic armor, complete missions, and advance in power to tackle new challenges. The game was developed by much of the same team that created Cybernator, and I have to tell you, the influence is significant. When I first saw this game, I actually confused the two games. Front Mission Gun Hazard is nothing if not story-centric, and relies heavily on the history leading up to the start of the game. In the early 21st century, the many nations of the world feuded over power and natural resources. However, the various nations of the world banded together in cooperation to create an orbital elevator known as Atlas in 2024. The device intended to provide power to the world, but its development was abandoned in favor of fusion reactors. Atlas thus became a symbol of failed dreams and hopes as the world regressed back into sectional conflicts between nations. The year is now 2064, and Colonel Ark Hellbrand stages a coup to overthrow the Republic of Bergen, led by President Mas Orwin. In his attempt to stop the coup, he taps NORAD, a paramilitary defense force, to assist. Among those involved is Albert Grabner, the the game's main protagonist and soldier in NORAD's Norwegian branch. He and his mentor Laros are sent to confront the rogue colonel. The story takes off from there, and I'll just say it has some really dark moments that provides a pretty big contrast to some of the other RPGs Squaresoft has published. Like many of the Japanese-only releases I cover, this one has a full English translation that was released in 2004 by the great folks at Aeon Genesis. Just trust me, it's one of the best, if not the best, translation teams out there, so it's definitely worth checking out. If you saw this project in English without knowing its origin, you would have thought it was a professional effort, to be sure. As usual, I'll provide a link to the translation patch in the description. One of the most fun things about Front Mission Gun Hazard is its power progression system. Just like any other RPG, you level up from experience gained from destroying enemies. Gaining higher levels also grants you access to progressively more powerful weapons and armor. Beyond this, actually using weapons in missions upgrades their efficiency over time in a percentage-based system. This means that weapons will eventually reload quicker, hit harder, or create a larger spread. Beyond the base weaponry, you can also customize your mech with a variety of weapons and equipment, all of which requires funds acquired during missions. Like you might imagine, many of the weapons have various strengths and weaknesses, and you're limited in power by being forced to choose among them. Both long and short range attacks can be acquired and used, and there's also some really strong single-use items that really come in handy during boss encounters. The primary weapon is the most important though. You can also shoot in 8 directions, including diagonals. Another great thing is that in addition to the main protagonist, you gain mech piloting allies throughout your journey that assist you in missions. The allies can really help you get past some of the game's challenges, but sometimes the AI that controls them isn't too hot. And then there's the block, probably the most defining aspect of Front Mission Gun Hazard, the thing that sets it apart from so many other games. Your block ability can stop various projectiles from doing damage to you. It can also be used to set up return volleys. This facet made the game one where you have to think on the fly and adapt to what's going on around you rather than simply just button mashing. Getting better at blocks really gives you the same level of power increase as weapons, armor, and upgrades do. You can also leave the mech to explore as your human character, and this is necessary to complete some parts of the game. It's pretty annoying since you're almost powerless without your uber powerful armor, but most of the time you don't have to be on foot for very long. An even more annoying part of the combat mech gameplay is that your own mech gets damaged whenever it's in range of enemy explosions, so it's a good idea to destroy things from a long range if you can. I really have to add that the sprite animations in Front Mission Gun Hazard are among the very best on the system, bar none. The numerous frames used for each movement are just awesome and really add a lot to the experience. There's also a great use of texture and how the game's platforms tend to blend into the backgrounds. All the explosions and even environmental effects like the sunset that brightens and dims as it becomes obscured by the landscape is just fantastic for the era. The graphics are really sophisticated, and a lot of work was obviously poured in to make it a great game to look at. Comparing this title to earlier action titles on the SNES, like ActRaiser for instance, makes this fact very clear. The soundtrack of Front Mission Gun Hazard was created by the legendary Nobuo Uematsu and Yasunori Mitsuda, so by that fact alone, you already know it's amazing. It's definitely a different feel than a lot of their other work though, so don't be surprised if you're taken aback a bit by the style. It uses a lot of synthesized and ambient sounds to match the futuristic motif, but you can still discern both of their musical geniuses in the work. As a whole, it sounds almost nothing like Chrono Trigger, but it's really good in its own right too. You can tell that both musicians were going for something different, and I think it was pretty successful. Front Mission Gun Hazard got a relatively sour response from gaming publications at the time, like Famitsu, which gave it a 28 out of 40. Still, that didn't stop it from selling. 300,000 total copies were sold in Japan, which was a pretty big accomplishment for a game released that late in Super Famicom history. Unfortunately, this game has never been localized officially in the West, but you can pick up a fairly cheap cartridge on eBay if you're a collector. Hopefully at some point it'll be brought to Steam, like the Romancing Saga games and Live Alive. It is a bit short compared to many of its conventional RPG counterparts though. It can be beaten in about 15 to 20 hours. Even still, this game has it all. Great graphics and animations, fun gameplay that'll keep your eyes glued to the screen, a solid story that dives deep into morality and philosophy, and a cool soundtrack. It's definitely one of the most innovative games on the system and earns bonus points for daring to be different. It's super overlooked, and there's really nothing else on the system like it. Now, when I think underrated RPGs, I think Ogre Battle March of the Black Queen for the SNES, the first one in the series, developed by Quest and published by Enix back before the company merged with Squaresoft. This was an incredible tactical-oriented, army-based RPG with an interesting tarot system, multiple endings, and a killer soundtrack. This game did not sell many copies in North America, and even though it was re-released on the PlayStation, that version was not very successful either. So this is a great game, and more players should play it. So let's check it out.
In 1993, Enix published Ogre Battle, the March of the Black Queen for Super Nintendo, 2 full years after its release in Japan. The game was developed by Quest, and it absolutely was one of the most ambitious titles on the system. It was a turn-based tactical RPG where strategy and organizing units plays a big role in the player's success. Interestingly, the game takes its title and subtitle from 2 different songs by the British rock band Queen. Attracting a cult following of fans, Ogre Battle has become one of the most fun and impressive games that the system had to offer. The story of Ogre Battle is darker and more political than many of the other games on the system. 25 years ago, Endora reigned as the Queen of Highland. She was at first viewed as a beloved, kind-hearted ruler. When she was brought word that the neighboring Holy Ladician Empire had plans to conquer her continent, she planned a strategy to thwart the invaders, sending word to the allied kingdoms. However, her plans were not taken seriously, and the 4 kingdoms united against Endora. In desperation, Endora appealed to the sage Rashidi, considered one of the 5 heroes of legend. She successfully repelled the invasions against her homeland, declared herself empress, and formed the Zetagenian Empire. As she consolidated more and more power, tyranny and evil has characterized her reign. At the beginning of the game, the player takes the role of the leader of a revolutionary force against Endora, the Liberation Army. When a new game is started, the player is first asked a series of questions by a seer named Warren. These questions test the player's instincts, philosophy, and values. The game then takes the player's answers and calculates them into the hero's stats, abilities, and starting units. I really love this aspect because it truly personalized the experience for the player and made every instance of Ogre Battle unique. Some of the questions you are asked are really interesting too, like the trait you would most associate with a successful king. Tactical gameplay is the focus of Ogre Battle, and much of the game revolves around placement of units on the overworld map. Groups can be moved around at the same time as other groups, and they can also be positioned to stop encroaching enemies. The main goal is to liberate towns, which yields several benefits for the player. The player can receive special items by doing so, some of which are very powerful. Also, you can gain tarot cards, which have various effects. For instance, cards can be used to shift the day to night, which influences the effectiveness of characters in battle. Each character in Ogre Battle possesses an alignment statistic. When characters with high alignment liberate towns, their reputation is raised. They are more effective in the daytime, and tarot cards can also raise your character's alignment. Low alignment characters are the exact opposite. They fight better at night and are weak against light attacks. Also, when low alignment characters liberate towns, their reputation will be lowered. Depending on your reputation, the game will unfold in slightly different ways. This can lead to recruitable characters treating you differently, and even to different endings. Those who like to customize and optimize units and formations to produce the best possible outcomes will fall in love with Ogre Battle's system. To form viable combat groups, party management is necessary, and it's a big focal point of Ogre Battle. Each unit makeup consists of 5 slots, each of which require 1 slot for a leader. Most humanoid characters consume 1 slot, whereas large monsters like griffins and dragons take up 2 slots. Leader stats also have an effect on the strength of the party, as the rest of the party receives some bonuses depending on the leader's traits. Also, some characters can traverse over parts of the map more easily, such as octopuses over water and griffins over mountains. There's also a class system, and each character can transition to a new class when certain conditions are met. For those who despise micromanagement, Ogre Battle is not the game for you, as customization and maintenance is a huge part of the game. Battles in Ogre Battle unfold in an almost fully automatic fashion, but I actually found that this works quite well. The game is centered more upon how you set up units, and your characters act accordingly in battle. The game is based around a set of defined attacks for each class that change depending on the row the character is located in. For instance, fighters will attack twice if they are put in the front row, but only once if put in the back. Mages are best put in the back row because they will cast powerful spells against enemies rather than attempting weak attacks from the front row. During battle, you can use two types of manual interactions, tactics and cards. Tactics defines the attack priority of the unit. Cards allow you to invoke the tarot cards you've been collecting in battle, which have different effects depending on the card. There are 22 cards in all, and the cards can do such things as damage all enemies, heal your party, or disorient the enemy forces. Ogre Battle's soundtrack is pretty good, but it's a bit repetitive as you end up hearing the same general tracks over and over, save for a few select circumstances. What is there is good, there just isn't enough variety. Because Enix only distributed 25,000 copies of Ogre Battle in North America, a ridiculously low number, it is exceedingly difficult to find the game today. As such, the game has commanded a very high price. Thankfully, the game was released on the Sony PlayStation under the title Ogre Battle Limited Edition, and also for the Nintendo Virtual Console. Out of all the games in the tactical RPG genre, Ogre Battle is definitely considered the most influential. The game came out at a time where there was basically nothing else like it. Ogre Battle therefore inspired a plethora of successors. A sequel called Tactics Ogre Let Us Cling Together was released in 1995, but at the time it was only available in Japan. Thankfully, that game was also re-released on the PlayStation when it was finally brought to North America. The influence of Ogre Battle and Tactics Ogre can also be seen in Final Fantasy Tactics, Square's smash hit for the PlayStation. This makes complete sense too, because the team that produced Final Fantasy Tactics, headed by Yasumi Matsuno, was largely the same as the one that created Ogre Battle and Tactics Ogre. Even beyond Final Fantasy Tactics, Ogre Battle's influence on other games in the genre such as Fire Emblem, Front Mission, and Vandal Hearts cannot be denied.
Coming in as the second most underrated Square Enix RPG of all time is Bahamut Lagoon for the Super Famicom. This is a game that got an English fan translation back in the day, but it's never been re-released or remade in any form and is aching for a remaster. This is a great tactical RPG with a fantastic soundtrack that's super underrated, really good characters, and a really interesting twist in the ending. This game deserves to be played by all fans of Squaresoft or Enix or Square Enix, so let's check it out.
By 1996, Squaresoft had released several critically acclaimed RPGs on the Super Famicom. After 1995's Chrono Trigger, however, the gaming industry started shifting to next-generation consoles. The Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation were popular in both Japan and North America, and game developers began focusing on those platforms. Even so, Squaresoft pushed on and released 3 additional RPGs on the Super Famicom in 1996. One of them was Bahamut Lagoon, which arrived in Japan in February of that year. Bahamut Lagoon is a turn-based, fantasy-oriented strategy RPG. It's grid-oriented, and terrain and spacing play a big role in battles. Unlike the 2 other RPGs Squaresoft published in 1996, Bahamut Lagoon's development team featured some key staff members of the Final Fantasy team. They included director Kazushige Nojime, writer Motomu Toriyama, and series creator Hironobu Sakaguchi working as a supervisor. Their influence is certainly felt here, because even though not a Final Fantasy game, there are some similarities that can be found within it. For instance, some sprites used within the game are nearly identical to those that can be found in Final Fantasy VI. Even so, rather than a Final Fantasy spin-off, it's more accurate to consider Bahamut Lagoon as a standalone game. The title takes its name from Bahamut, the king of dragons from the Final Fantasy games. There doesn't seem to be much of a lore crossover between the two though, so it's best understood that the Final Fantasy dragon and the Bahamut Lagoon dragon are separate entities. The term lagoon does have important meaning. The world of Aurelis is composed of several continents that float in the sky. These continents are called lagoons, which play into the game's story. Bahamut Lagoon features an epic tale that kicks off just as the Grand Balos Empire launches an invasion of Kana Kingdom. As the captain of the kingdom's dragon squad, Bu is sent to repel the invasion. After making small inroads, the kingdom is completely overrun, leaving Bu to sort things out with the help of allies. Like the main character in Chrono Trigger, Bu is a silent protagonist, and his decisions and dialogue are guided by the player. The allied characters are well developed, and the game did a pretty good job of throwing in a few interesting twists and turns along the way. In fact, the ending was dark and quite bittersweet. Of course, I won't spoil it. The combat in Bahamut Lagoon is grid-based and very similar to games like Tactics Ogre, Der Langrisser, and Final Fantasy Tactics. Certain spells can affect multiple groups of units, while some can only affect a single one. The interface for movement and map strategy was well designed and easy enough to use. Some of the structures on the map can be affected by spells. For instance, certain spells can be used against walls to clear the way for ground forces to move through. This system allowed for some creativity to be employed by the player, something lacking in many other strategy RPGs. The most unique aspect of Bahamut Lagoon revolves around dragons. Each party of 4 characters has a dragon assigned to it, and each dragon has its own stats and combat abilities. Unlike allied characters in a party, dragons are totally uncontrollable in combat, and are guided only by artificial intelligence. If dragons die in combat, the bond that they share with the characters they're grouped with are adversely affected as well. All dragons are unique, and it was a really nice touch to add powerful dragons as elements to take account for in combat. The game requires quite a bit of micromanagement, which is kind of a double-edged sword. Creating optimal parties of 4 characters, equipping them, creating the right formations, and placing dragons correctly takes a lot of time. Some players may enjoy this, while others may consider it a chore. It's similar to the original Ogre Battle game in that way. In battle, the attack animations of both the friendly and enemy characters are very impressive, and people that follow this channel know I'm a sucker for detailed animations. When characters unleash their attacks, it looks really special. Even things as mundane as enemies slashing you really adds a lot to the experience, and draws the player in. It's equally remarkable how many unique attacks were created in this one. Unfortunately, the dragons lack the striking animations that the enemies and allies have, but overall, the combat visuals are fantastic. Bahamut Lagoon remained unplayable to the vast majority of North American gamers until 2002, when DJAP Translations released a fully English localized version. This is the one I played for hours when it was released, and I can't express how excited I was to be able to play it. It really was a treat to get my hands on anything new that was Squaresoft related in those days. In addition to the 2002 English patch, yet another group called Nier released its own English translation in 2020, so there's multiple ways to play this game in English now. I don't have many specifics on differences that exist between these two translations, but if you do, let me know in the comments. I'll include links to both translations in the description below, so you can get your hands on them. As far as soundtracks go, this game offers a score of epic tunes that you would expect from a fantasy-oriented RPG. The opening theme's especially catchy and always stuck with me. There's a total of 36 tracks, which was around average for an RPG of this era. Of the 3 RPGs released by Squaresoft in 1996, I think this one had the best soundtrack. Outside of Nobuo Uematsu and Yasunori Mitsuda's work, I think this one stands as one of the best RPG soundtracks on the entire Super Famicom. It's really just that good. Bahamut Lagoon sold relatively well in Japan for the time it was released. About 475,000 copies were purchased in 1996, making it the 17th best-selling game of that year. That's no small feat either for a year that included the release of many popular next-generation titles and the launch of the Nintendo 64. Bahamut Lagoon was a fun strategy RPG with good visuals and sound. It delivers more fun through gameplay than it does storyline, but it really isn't deficient in either category. I think it's well worth playing today if you couldn't play it back in the day due to the language barriers. Overall, I really liked the game and was so glad when I learned it was first translated way back then. While Squaresoft could have just made a cookie-cutter RPG exactly like Final Fantasy, they used some creative concepts here and made it stand out from their flagship series. As far as RPGs go, Bahamut Lagoon is the very definition of a hidden gem.
And the number one most underrated Square Enix RPG of all time is Treasure of the Rudras for the Super Famicom. This is an excellent RPG developed by Square at the tail end of the SNES's life cycle, and it never made its way to North America, never got an English translation, but it's got an amazing story, great characters, killer soundtrack, and 2 awesome gameplay systems. Number 1, the scenario system allows you to play each of 3 scenarios in any order, and even lets you leave one scenario for another at a time. And you also have an incredible mantra system that allows you to combine different prefixes and suffixes and create your own spells. The animations are great, the graphics are great, everything about this RPG is great, and it really needs to be remade. Square Enix, please do that, and let's check it out.
By the end of the Super Famicom's life cycle, Squaresoft had established itself as the predominant master of the RPG genre. From the Final Fantasy games to Chrono Trigger to Super Mario RPG, the company had pretty much done it all on the system. However, as 1996 rolled around, most developers halted their efforts to begin planning to produce games for the next generation consoles. Instead, Squaresoft published a series of games in 1996, one of which was Rudra no Hihou, or Treasure of the Rudras. It was the very last game the company developed in-house for the Super Famicom. Since the game was only released in Japan, one may ask how it can be played in English. Well, thanks to the amazing efforts of Aeon Genesis, the game was fully translated in 2003 for the first time. A blessing to all the RPG fanatics that missed out on this gem back then. Like all Aeon Genesis translations, rigorous work was put into this project, and the dialogue was brilliantly crafted. I can't say enough about how enjoyable this translation was. It was really professional endeavor that put some licensed translations, Breath of Fire 2, to shame. As far as storyline goes, Treasure of the Rudras is purely innovative. Its setting is a futuristic world that's been ravaged by pollution. In its current condition, mankind will be destroyed in 15 days, and many have already lost hope that the world's demise can be reversed. Most of the game centers upon the drive of the characters to do so, though. What makes this interesting is the various characters have different ideas in regard to how to accomplish that, so seeing how the contradictory perspectives played out was awesome. The game's intro is also pretty dark and was illustrated with the best cinematography the Super Famicom could offer. The story is divided into 3 main scenarios, each of which features a main protagonist. Scion is a soldier that was trained by a well-known swordsman and seeks to be the strongest man in the world. Riza is a princess that seeks to purify the world and reverse the environmental calamity that threatens it. Finally, Serlant is an archaeologist that seeks to gain knowledge of the world's destruction. Each of the 3 scenarios can be played in any order, and you can even depart from one scenario before completing it to play another. Incredibly, the actions that the characters take in one scenario can even affect the circumstances of the others when you return to them. For instance, specific locations can be visited at different seasons for different results, and items left behind in one scenario will be there for characters in the others to discover. In terms of RPG innovations, this element was distinct, and virtually no other game I can think of did anything like this. As I played through the game, I couldn't help but be awestruck by how interconnected this made the world feel. Also, the 3 separate groups of characters crossed paths at various points through the storyline, and it was incredibly fun to see how they interacted. You also witnessed some of the same crucial storyline elements from completely different perspectives, which was also a great touch. This factor has led some reviewers to note that the story plays out similarly to Game of Thrones, where the aims of the characters, no matter how evil, are justified by context. After completing the original 3 scenarios, a 4th scenario is revealed to play. It features the roving thief Dune in tandem with the other 3 heroes. There's some real surprises at the end, so I won't spoil it here. The structure of the scenarios reminded me a bit of Squaresoft's Live Alive, another Japan-only release, but that game's scenarios were much more distinct from one another and didn't have the crossover overlap that Treasure of the Rudras does. This system is very unique and it works well for this game. The most standout aspect of Treasure of the Rudras in comparison to other RPGs of the time is definitely the spell system. In most games of this kind, of course, you obtain spells organically by gaining levels or buying them. In this one, however, spells, known in this game as mantra, are created by adding prefixes and suffixes to root words. Some of the root words are learned after dialogue with characters and NPCs, while others are found in chests. Most of the magic root words represent a basic archetype. For instance, Lef, L-E-F, is a basic heal. When you combine it with the suffix Na, N-A, for Lefna, the heal affects multiple allies for the price of 4 additional magic points. There are all sorts of combinations like this, and a lot of the game's fun is found in discovering the best for each situation. Combat in Treasure of the Rudras is turn-based, not unlike what you would find in the world of Final Fantasy. The way the characters are oriented on the screen is also really reminiscent of the Romancing Saga games. The sprite-based 2D graphics in Treasure of the Rudras are among the best the SNES has to offer. Visually, the game is as much of a treat to look at as Chrono Trigger is, and offers even better character animations in battle. Each character has several unique animations that stand out, which was a characteristic that seemed to transcend the era. At that time, almost every other game on the system had simplistic animations, usually with characters limited to a few each. Also, the layered backgrounds made even simple things, like wandering around in the world, look like a spectacle that postdated the SNES. The graphical work was really pre-3D Squaresoft at its best. So, what in the world is a Rudra? As the story goes, the Rudra are a godlike race that appear on the planet every 4,000 years, immediately before a cataclysmic event. The Rudra destroy it, recreate the world in a new image, and eventually turn into fossilized remains. This element borrows heavily from Indian culture, namely the concept of the Wheel of Time. The clues the Rudra left behind, and the character's pursuit of them, was a fun concept. As a motif, it completely disposed of the whole confront the Empire theme that most RPGs of this time adopted. As far as soundtracks go, Treasure of the Rudras brings a respectable variety of fantasy-oriented tunes. It's almost impossible to approach the quality of a soundtrack composed by, say, Nobuo Uematsu or Yasunori Mitsuda, but this one comes close. It was done by Ryuji Sasai, who also did the music for Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. It's a treat to listen to, and if you're familiar with RPG-style music, the score will be right up your alley. There's also certain important themes that have day and night versions, which was also a unique little twist. Overall, Treasure of the Rudras was a great RPG that North American gamers simply missed out on. If it had been released here, it may well have gained the same acclaim and cult following as the other Squaresoft titans of the era. The timing couldn't have been worse for its retail release on a system that was dying, but thankfully, those who still love the RPGs from that time can play it again now and still have a lot of fun with it. With its creative magic system and overlapping storyline as its most creative assets, it carries my highest recommendations. If you have played the renowned RPGs on the SNES, but not this one, I think you will find a lot of surprising similarities. The game is of high quality and certainly shouldn't be ignored by retro RPG freaks.
So there it is, guys, the top 5 most underrated Square Enix RPGs of all time. This was an incredibly difficult list to make, and there's many games that really could be honorable mentions or even snuck their way into this list, but I do want to hear from you. What do you think was the most underrated Square Enix RPG? Let me know down below in the comments. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and consider becoming a YouTube member or Patreon patron for special perks like advanced viewing of my videos, and I'll catch you guys later.